My name is Sasha Sloan, and I am interviewing Dominique Bravo on the topic of the 70s and 80s. The time is 6 p.m. and the date is May 18th, 2015. What is your name?
My name is Dominique Bravo.
Where were you born?
I was born in Los Angeles, California.
Was this where you grew up?
Yes, I grew up in Los Angeles.
Where do you currently live?
I currently live in Park Slope, Brooklyn, 887 Union Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11215.
In Los Angeles. Where did you go to elementary and high school?
When I was very young, my family lived in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, and I went to Hancock Park Elementary School. When I started third grade, my parents took me out of Hancock Park and put me in Beverly Hills Catholic School, which was in Beverly Hills.
Where is your family from?
My parents are from Peru, are from Lima, Peru. They came to the United States after they got married.
Could you describe the area you grew up in?
Well, the Fairfax district, which is an old section of Los Angeles just west of Beverly Hills, is a neighborhood where now the CBS studios are. There's also the La Brea Tar Pits is a big part of that area. And when I was growing up, the most distinctive thing about it was where there were a lot of Jews who lived there, in particular older Jewish people who had escaped the Holocaust.
Do you remember if you worked at all as a child in the 70s?
Yes. When I was in elementary school, I had a paper route, and I delivered newspapers on my bicycle every Sunday morning. When I was 14 or 15, when I was in high school, I worked at Baskin-Robbins ice cream store in Beverly Hills.
Can you tell me what you remember most vividly about your childhood in the 70s?
Well, a few things. One, we had earthquakes that were always kind of a big deal. Basically, the earth would start to shake, and the house would shake, and sometimes we got out of school. Like you guys have snow days, sometimes we had earthquake days. And there was also, and I remember this a lot when I was in high school, every season there are winds. They're called the Santa Ana winds, and they're just incredibly powerful, hot winds that go through the city, and it just affects what you do. Just like weather affects what you do here in New York, the winds would affect kind of what you could do in Los Angeles.
What was your favorite thing to do in your free time while growing up in the 70s?
When I was really little, things were very different then than they are now. Kids just had a lot more freedom. And after school, my friends and I would hang out in the street. I had a skateboard that I would ride around, or we'd ride our bikes, and we would just kind of ride around the neighborhood. We'd go down through the alleys. We'd go into La Brea Tar Pits. Just kind of explored. And the rule was that we had to come home when the street lights went on. When the street lights went on, which was usually about 6:30, we had to go home. Later, were you just asking about when I was really young, or
Every part of your childhood.
when I was in high school? My friends and I we went to movies. It was the time of sort of the first blockbusters, which was kind of a new thing. I think it was Steven Spielberg who started, and a lot of them, by blockbusters I mean just there were a lot of technical effects, which was a new thing at that time. And I remember there were a lot of disaster movies. So there was Towering Inferno, about a burning skyscraper. There was one about a ship that capsized, the Poseidon Adventure. Um, there was, another one, Jaws, about the shark attacking people. It was just a thing, and and especially perhaps because I was growing up in West LA and Beverly Hills, and there were a lot of movie people around. Going to movies was a very big deal.
What do you remember most about your education in the 70s?
Um, well, I remember when I was young. I don't remember now what year it was, but my class watched the Apollo space landing, the Apollo space launch and moon landing on television, and they showed it on at school. And that was a really big deal. Um, and then I remember, although since my parents were from Peru and weren't entirely sort of hooked into sort of what was going on with politics, I do remember when Nixon resigned, and that was a very big deal, and that people were talking about it. Again, in high school, I started driving at 16 because everybody in Los Angeles drives, unlike here in New York. You kind of need a car to get around Los Angeles, and everybody got a car. And I remember the gas lines. Gas suddenly, the price of gas soared, and there was a shortage, and you had to wait in line to get gas. Sometimes you'd have to wait an hour, and I remember we had sort of gas line parties. People would sort of get together and go to the gas station together.
How does your daily routine today compare with your daily routine in the 70s or 80s?
Well, I'm a professional now with 3 kids, so day-to-day stuff is very different than when I was younger. But there's a couple of things that are very different now than when I was growing up. One thing, when I was growing up, TV was very big. Everyone watched TV, and there were only 3 channels. There was Channel 2, which was CBS, Channel 4, which was NBC, and Channel 7, which was ABC. There was also the public station, PBS, but I didn't know anybody who watched PBS. And in general, when I was young, families would watch the same shows. There was All in the Family, there was Laverne and Shirley, there were situation comedies, sitcoms, and they were 30 minutes once a week, and you watched your shows. Now it's just it's very different. Television is very different because you can call up whatever you want to see, and there's just such a variety. But then there just really wasn't. There was what was on those stations, and also very different was how people consumed news. Everyone read the newspaper. In Los Angeles, there was the Herald Examiner and the LA Times. Everyone read the newspaper, and everyone watched the evening news. The evening news came on at 5 o'clock and at 6 o'clock and then again at 11 o'clock. And everyone watched it. That was how you found out about what was going on around the world and around the country. And sport and newscasters were just very important. What were their names? Peter Jennings, but maybe he was a little bit later. Walter Cronkite. They were on TV, they were newscasters, but they were so important. And how they delivered news about what was going on in the world was just a really important part of most people's day.
So about the television shows that were aired,
Mm-hmm.
were they just about a family's life, or did they include some of the current issues or problems in the country?
That's interesting. As I remember, they really were not about anything that was going on anywhere. They were really just family stories. I remember there was one show The Mary Tyler Moore Show. And this was about a young woman who worked in a television station. And everyone loved her. And she was sort of this young, pretty woman. And the things that would come up from week to week were just, I don't know. I mean, they really meant nothing. I mean, it was just kind of a situation comedy where there wasn't anything serious. And then, was it she or her roommate then became very popular, and then her roommate got her own show, Rhoda, I can't remember now what her name was, but then when they got married, that was a really big deal, and it was a really big deal. I mean, how you hear now, oh, the end of Mad Men, or it was like that, but it wasn't about anything other than like they were getting married or something. So not really. There was one show which was different, and that was All in the Family, another really popular show. But that really dealt with issues, social issues. It was still a comedy. Interestingly, it was about a couple, Archie Bunker, Archie and Edith, and they actually lived in Queens, and they were incredibly racist, or they weren't. He was, and just homophobic. Everything that you can imagine of someone who's has sort of their own sort of very narrow worldview. And they had two children who were in their 20s, who of course were very liberal, and would bring up issues, would come home with some issues. And that was a very interesting show because it definitely raised these questions from a very, a very racist, unsophisticated, ignorant character who you also really loved. So it was a very interesting way of getting at these social issues. And interestingly, now that I remember, they had neighbors, so a black family that apparently had moved in on their block, as I recall, the Jeffersons. And there was just a lot of there were a lot of episodes about them having to deal with the Jeffersons, this black family. And it turned out the Jeffersons then got their show. So then we had a television show called The Jeffersons, and it was about them and their experience in the city, and making it in the city. So, I mean, I think at that time it was still very producers, the networks were very careful.
So you would say most of them were just about the family life?
Yes.
So how would you say, or how would you remember food being prepared in your house? Or did your family ever use the conveniences such as the hamburger helper?
Yes. Well, my parents both worked. First of all, both my father and my mother worked, so it wasn't like there was anybody making meals all the time. I mean, my mother, she would sometimes make sort of Peruvian meals, but she was also very excited and into sort of becoming an American. And for her, she used all these products like Hamburger Helper, it came in a box, and all you had to buy was hamburger meat and mixed it all together, and it created this dish. I don't know, it was kind of like a goulash kind of thing. And there was also Tang, which was a powder that you put in water to make kind of an orange juicy kind of thing that apparently the astronauts drank. I don't know. And there were other kinds of fast foods like that were popular, and TV dinners that also became, I remember that being sort of a newish thing. Food that was easily prepared.
Do you remember your parents' daily routines? What they did in a normal day?
Sure. I mean, like I said, we got the newspaper every morning and we read it. They read it. What else did they do? We would, a lot like we do here. I mean, we have our coffee in the morning, and we go off to work. Um, Unlike today, where everyone has a cell phone today, so we're kind of in touch all the time. You really weren't in touch. We would go to school, and they would go to work, and we didn't see them until the evening.
How did your mother's daily routine compare to your father's?
Well, my mother was responsible for keeping the house, even though she also worked full time. She made, all the meals, and she cleaned, and, pretty traditional roles. Um, I mean, my parents are also from Peru, so in Peru, especially in those years, and with their generation, men really did not think it was their role to help at all with household jobs.
So the 70s were described by some history theorists as the me decade. Divorce rates were high, and political ideals were shifting to more individual and liberal views. Do you remember any of this being true for your coming of age in this time period?
Um, that's interesting. I really I really don't. I mean, in part because my parents, again, were from Peru and were from a certain generation. Um, my mother, you didn't ask me how old I am, but I'm 53. My mother, is now 83. So, she really came out of really the 50s. And roles were very distinct then. So, not really. I mean, I always felt, and also my parents raised me to be very independent, and I, always thought I was going to go to college. I mean, the other thing is that my parents met in law school in Peru. So they were both professionals. They couldn't practice when they got here, so they both took jobs. My mother took a job which was a very hard job for her to get because she didn't speak English really very well when she first got here, but she ended up as a legal secretary. And my father went to work for the city as a rehabilitation counselor, but they sort of started again when they got here. Where was I going with that? No, but they always instilled in me the expectation that I would go to school, I would go to college, so.
Do you think your parents raised you differently than some of your friends or at school's parents did? To that? Because they came from Peru. No, weren't
Well,
traditional.
Perhaps. I mean, there are certain things about, and it would be interesting to know if it's still like this in Peru. But one thing, we were very obedient, and we didn't talk back. Like I remember when my parents would have parties. My parents were pretty social, and they would have parties, and there would be adults, in the house. And I was the oldest. I have two younger brothers, but we would hide to watch the adults. We would never dream of coming out, but we would hide and we would watch them. And, it was sort of you kind of speak when you're spoken to sort of culture. Very different from, I think, most people, and probably in Peru today too, where kids are much more the center of adult lives. And kids feel like they're the center of everyone, should be the center of everyone's attention no matter where they are. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think?
So,
We also, It was also a little strange for me because I grew up, as I said, in Beverly Hills, and we didn't have any money. Both my parents worked really hard. Actually, my mother was working two jobs for a long time, and a lot of my friends did have a lot of money. So um, I was sort of conscious of it, but not in a way like I would never talk about it. So we grew up differently, but I just never. And also, I wasn't white, and I really felt not white. Um, so not having any money and not feeling white was sort of a big part of how I grew up. I'm kind of feeling like an outsider.
So, who were the most famous people in the 70s and 80s, and why were they famous?
Um, I mean, the musical groups. Um, my first concert, I went to see Paul McCartney and Wings when I was a sophomore in high school at the Los Angeles Coliseum. Um, I think at the time I thought that singers were the biggest deals. um, Movie stars really weren't, and maybe it was being Beverly Hills. Robert Mitchum lived in next door to us, so I was kind of used to seeing movie stars. And one of my friends was Bing Crosby's daughter, and so movie stars were never a big deal to me, but singers and members of rock bands kind of were. In terms of, I wasn't that conscious really then of like politics or history, although actually I do remember in the late 70s when I was, I guess, in high school, right before high school, uh, the Shah of Iran was deposed. The Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, and a lot of Iranians left and came to the United States, and in particular to Beverly Hills. So I remember hearing about the Shah, and I remember hearing about the Ayatollah Khomeini. Also then, and I guess like now, but then too, sports figures, baseball and basketball players. Like I remember watching basketball on TV with my dad, and sports figures were really big. Then there was a basketball team called the Harlem Globetrotters, and they were pretty famous.
So, would you say that the people who are famous, such as Kim Kardashian today, who don't really do anything, it wasn't the case back then? Yeah.
That's so funny. I've never thought about that. No, not at all. That's exactly right. That just wasn't. You really kind of had to have done something. You kind of had to have done something to be famous. Trying to think if there was somebody. TV show stars. There was a TV show called The Partridge Family. It was a weekly TV show, and it was a mom and her 5 kids or something, and they were also the band. And they also sold records, and I had their albums, and David Cassidy was the sort of 17-year-old boy in the group, and he was really handsome with long hair, and he was really a big deal. But yeah, no, you kind of really had to have done something. You know why, in part, I think? Because now people become famous, and in part because whatever it is that they did or didn't do, or what they look like, or whatever, gets disseminated through social media. So that's how you become famous, is you become famous on social media. There wasn't anything like that then. So you kind of had to be on TV for anybody to know who you were.
So the disco dance style was brought into the mid to late 70s pop culture by movies such as Saturday Night Fever and Grease. Do you remember participating in any of this movement, or if it affected your life in any way?
Oh, sure. I love disco music. Donna Summer, I loved. I don't remember it being a lifestyle. I mean, I think it might have been a little too young. I don't know. But I just like the music. I do, though, even more than enjoying the music, and I definitely did, because to be honest. I still do. I remember and I guess this must have been in the late 70s, early 80s, this like complete, disco is out. And if you liked disco, you were definitely out. Like no one would admit to liking disco. I mean, I remember that really strongly. You just would not dare say that
So
you liked it.
Would you say that it became a counterculture?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, counterculture usually has a positive spin. Disco kind of became really famous, and then it became cool to not like it.